Here's what I'm going to have to do before we get into this guest over here, just so you know. You and I are going to have a conversation with this guest. And then, Philip, I think I understand that after the conversation is over, we have to deny that we ever spoke to you. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that would be my preference.
That would be the preference?
So
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Philip
I don't have
Mudd.
to talk to my sisters about
Yeah, there are certain conversations. Philip Mudd is my guest here. Now, he's the former deputy director of the CIA, which is why I say that, and it was a counter-terrorist. And, let's take a look at what you did here. First off, what you did there, let's back up for just a minute. How do you get a job like that? Where did you start that you wound up as the deputy director of the CIA?
you're not going to believe this, but I had a graduate degree in English literature in 1984, and
Really?
83, 84, I couldn't find a job.
Oh,
And the
okay.
CIA was advertising in the newspaper.
Okay,
in the
this does
pre-internet
not
days,
give
and
me confidence in the CIA, Philip.
I drove up to the front gate, no lie, with a paper resume in the pre-internet days, and the security guard looked at me like I was nuts.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of my career.
So how do you go from there, then, just knocking on their door with a resume that, I mean, obviously it doesn't look like you got the qualifications that we would think of. How do you work your way up through, and what did you have to work your way up through? What did you do while you're at the CIA?
There's two basic pieces of the agency. There's the interesting people that collect stuff overseas, and then there's the boring people like me who look at all the information and try to make sense of it, like answering questions like, how are we doing against Al-Qaeda? So I learned to write well. I learned to speak well. I had great mentors. And then I just outweighted everybody else. I mean, I was there for 25 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that makes a whole lot of sense then. And finally get yourself into this, which is a really interesting position to wind up in. Now, your book, which is I got to confess, I've had a chance to flip through it, but this is going to be this weekend's read. Black Site, the CIA in the post 9/11 world. And it looks like what you're focusing on here is we've had some sites where if we caught someone with Al-Qaeda, Taliban, something like that, we would have to take them somewhere, hold them, interrogate them. And I think there's a lot about those places that is misunderstood. Are you just trying to help us understand what goes on there?
Yeah, that's part of it. But I wanted to talk to a bunch of my colleagues that have never spoken, and they spoke to me because I know them all. And not only talk about what happened after 9/11, but also give people a sense about what it was like to be there, just a sense of the time, because I was afraid, it's less than a generation ago, I was afraid that sense would be lost. It was so intense. I just wanted to recreate what my friends were talking to me about in terms of their experiences, some of which I shared.
Okay. Could I honestly say then that when 9/11 happened, even those of you who are at the CIA, in the military, we were ready for war on all sorts of different fronts. We just weren't ready for that. I mean, didn't see that coming at all. Did we know how to respond to it?
I don't think we did. I mean, if you look at everything that had to be done, the invasion of Afghanistan, creating a coalition of foreign governments who are fighting Al-Qaeda, even something that had been debated for years before 9/11, talking to people about the failure to arm drones before 9/11. Nobody wanted to do that stuff. And immediately when you talk to people about what happened after, decisions that people had sat on for years, all of a sudden everybody like, let's go.
Yeah.
And the atmosphere was just so intense. It's like, whatever you want to do, let's go.
Okay. So in other words, you had to sort of make it up as you went along. And then, but here's the trick. You're riding a thing, as the CIA does, you're sort of riding an edge there. There's stuff you have to make up. You got to do what you got to do. And sometimes you're sort of flirting with the rules, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how the CIA thinks, very agile organization. They like to look at themselves. Again, I was there for a long time and say, if nobody else wants to do it, maybe we should do it. That was the attitude toward keeping Al-Qaeda prisoners starting in the spring and summer of 2002. That said, there's an overlay here about conversations between CIA lawyers and the Department of Justice to say, look, we know people are going to judge us later on. We need the legal documentation from you and the Department of Justice to make sure what we're doing complies with U.S. law. There's a lot of that going on in 02 and 03.
I'm talking with Philip Mudd. He's the former director of the CIA. So let's take a look then, because, of course, there were a lot of accusations about torture, what was considered to be torture, what's not considered to be torture, was acceptable. But let's face it, if you got some guy that we've captured out there in the field and he knows stuff that we need in order to win this, in order to save lives. How do you extract the information, and how do you do that in a way that's, well, I don't know how else to put it, but not be upsetting, within the rules, humane? I mean, what do you do here once you got the guy?
You do a couple of things. You look in the mirror and say, look, if we send him back to the United States, he's going to get a lawyer and shut up. This is the decision that people talked about in mid 2002. The second option is to say, if we open our own prisons, we have to go again to the lawyers and say, if we want to deprive somebody of sleep, which is a common interrogation tactic, does that comply with federal law? We don't want to put our officers at risk. What do you, Department of Justice, think is within the law? People today think some of what happened was too aggressive. That was not the attitude 17 years ago. People then said, this complies, you should do this.
What about waterboarding? Is that torture?
That was the Department of Justice. Let me give you the philosophy. Long-term physical or psychological damage to a prisoner, knowingly doing that, is torture.
Okay.
The judgment on waterboarding was that it does not cause long-term physical or psychological damage to a prisoner. Therefore, it's okay. Again, that changed when President Obama came in, but in 2002, the lawyer said this complies. The attitude in the country was so different, and talking to my friends about this, just so different.
Yeah. Did you ever, and of course that will change with different administrations that come in, obviously. Yeah. So you got to watch out for that. We have a new administration. We have to do it a different way. But you personally, though, did you ever take a look at something and say, okay, here we went too far, but there we didn't go far enough? I mean, you must have had some of those conversations with yourself in the mirror in the morning while shaving.
Yes. Not only once. I'd say thousands of times. I remember driving home from work and you'd see what was then called Faces of the Fallen, reading a major newspaper that had pictures and stories of the people who had died in the towers or in Shanksville or the Pentagon. And you sat there and said, I know this is going to be controversial. I know this is tough. On the other hand, what if we don't acquire information that could allow a child to grow up with their parents? It's not that we didn't have questions about what we were doing. It was just in the tenor of the times you're saying, I'm not sure what the right option is. If we do nothing, maybe it's worse than doing what we're doing. It was just, there were no good choices. There just weren't any.
Well, now, though, I mean, so are you still with the CIA, or have you moved on from there?
No, I moved on a while ago.
So now when you look back then, do you look back proud, regrets, a little bit of both?
Not many regrets. Pride is not the word I would use. I'm not sure exactly what it would be, but those of us who were there remember on the day after 9/11, 99% of Americans would say we're vulnerable. These guys scored once. There's going to be a second, what we call a second wave, second major Al Qaeda attack. And I think my colleagues and I look back and say we were part of a national effort that ensured that a second attack, a catastrophic attack, didn't happen. I look back, and my colleagues do as well, and say, we did stuff that was tough, but if it prevented a second event, maybe that was the right thing to do.
Well, let me ask you, let's combine numbers then, because, okay, there's things that you guys prevented in the CIA and with the FBI and the military. There's things that you prevented that we know about as the general public. And there's things that you guys prevented that we didn't know about and probably never will. Can you give us a ballpark about how many, let's say, attacks, if you will, big and small, do you think you might have prevented through your efforts?
Geez, I don't know. Let me give you a flavor.
Yes.
Al Qaeda was trying to develop a second hijacking wave. If there had not been the combination of everything from the U.S. invasion to American intelligence efforts, I'm confident there would have been a second hijacking wave. Okay. The second major thing I'd say is there was a lot of work done at the CIA and elsewhere on understanding how Al Qaeda was researching anthrax. I'm confident that had there not been such a major U.S. effort, there would have been an Al Qaeda-inspired anthrax attack in the United States or Europe. Combine that with every time somebody puts a backpack on and tries to conduct an attack, Al Qaeda wanted more strategic attacks, and I think they would have succeeded.
Okay, my guest is Philip Mudd. The book is Black Site. Philip is former deputy director of the CIA. What were you trying to accomplish writing this book? Which, by the way, did you ever watch the movie Spinal Tap?
Yes.
Okay, remember the album was black? Yeah, that's the cover of your
Oh,
book.
I don't remember that.
Oh, no, they had a big controversy about how controversial the cover of the album was going to be. So the compromise with the record company was the album cover was just going to be black. And so
That was a great movie.
yeah, it was a great movie. So the cover of your book here is just black, except for the lettering on it here.
Yeah.
And right away I thought, oh, it's a Spinal Tap book here. What is you put this book out exactly why, Philip? You're hoping people will take away what from it?
Well, I mean, I think that generation's going to be lost. The generation that I was with after 9/11. I talked to so many of my colleagues about their personal experiences that would never be told, and I said, that was such an important piece of American history. If I don't tell their story, if I don't give people a chance to step back in time, maybe nobody will.
Right.
So I like to write as well. I just like words. So I sat down saying, I'm going to talk to my colleagues and I'm going to tell their story.
Okay. Well, again, the book is it's got to be some weekend reading for me to thoroughly go through the whole thing. So I'm glad you went ahead and put this out, and I'll make sure that people can get a. Where is it? It's in bookstores, right? But where else can people get it?
It's in bookstores or Amazon. You just search Black Site and Mud on Amazon, and you'll find it. It's out there. People are buying it.
Fascinating stuff. And by the way, thank you for all your service and everything that you did that we know about and don't know about.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.